Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, where myself and my co-host, Dr. Joe Hamlett, try to save the world at every moment we get and impart some very dry, unpredictable humor when you least expect it, just to keep things
Right.
interesting and fun. So I'm Dr. Dave Peltz, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Joe Hamlett. We're here to uh, again, solve the world's problems or attempt to piece by piece, nugget by nugget. So we'd like to welcome all of our viewers and listeners to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If this is your first time, we hope you enjoy this episode and find some value in it. And if you like it, that's awesome. Share it. So today's topic, in our usual fashion, one of us introduces, which is me today. Ta-da! And I'm going to come up with this topic and throw it over to Joe and see what kind of hot potato action he can get out of it. So today's topic is momentum.
Oh, momentum.
Mhm. What do you
That's a
think about
very
that
good
there,
tip.
Dr. Joe? Momentum.
Well, I think that helps you accomplish a lot of things. If you are able to jump on that momentum train while you got it going. And what I mean by that, so I'll give you an example. And many of you have heard this, but when I went back to school in 2005, my initially it was just to earn an associate's degree. That was my intent when I enrolled in school, and when I thought about furthering my education. But what I soon realized was that I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed that feeling of learning new things and being exposed to new things, and so that led to me continuing down the path. I had the momentum, finished my associates, finished a bachelor's, and finished another associate's, and MBA, and then doctorate. And it was because I had the momentum. My mindset was learn, 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 capture as much as you can. And I say that because I realized too that if I would not have continued, if I would have stopped, say after the bachelor's or the master's degree, I wasn't going to go back because I had the momentum.
Mhm.
I was like clockwork. Everything was clicking.
Mhm.
That's how I was able to achieve a doctorate degree in 9 years, is because I
Mhm.
had the momentum. I didn't shift it up. I didn't change it. I mean, literally 9 years straight. There was only
Wow.
one time when I took a intentional break, and that was actually only for 30 days. And so, other
That's
than
not really
that,
a break, Joe. That's
no,
like
not
waiting for the next
really. It
class to
was
start, I
exactly. It
think,
was really
or
just kind
next
of
semester.
regroup and get your stuff together. But up until that point, that was actually probably 5.5 years in.
Wow.
So I just pushed through because I knew I had the momentum. I didn't have to change things up. I was in a groove.
Yeah.
And like I said, I know if I would have stopped, I would have disrupted that momentum. It would have
Hmm.
been way more challenging for me to come back to get started. And not saying that I couldn't, but I just knew when I with that momentum that I had, it was, like a blur. It really was,
Yeah.
because just things were clicking, things were just moving along, and like I say, without the disruption, I'm really confident that that's how I earned my doctorate degree. Because if I had stopped after master's degree, waited a few years, I don't know that I would have had the same passion for completing it, and
Hmm.
so I would have lost all of that momentum that I had going forward. So
Well, and I
that's
think
my
that displays
example.
a couple of things. It also shows a lot of self-awareness
Absolutely.
because my story again, for those of you who don't know, Joe and I are basically twins, sort of, except yeah, we're not. Um, Similar backgrounds and stories, but with me, it was that momentum that got me through my bachelor's and master's, and then I took a pause and went back a few years later to get my doctorate. So that self-awareness is big because you knew that if you stopped, you were not going to
Absolutely.
be in a position to pick that momentum back up. And I will agree, taking a 4 year sabbatical, it was challenging
Right.
because my mindset was still there, but my skill set had waned a little bit. Like, I was used to, writing a paper really quick. Well, that wasn't so quick anymore, and I was
Right.
used to reading quick, and that wasn't reading so quick anymore. So the skill, it's like riding a bike. You used to be able to do all kinds of neat tricks and jumps, and then you
Yeah.
stop bicycling for a while, and you're just struggling sometimes to stay vertical, and because
Right.
that's perpendicular is the key to riding a bicycle. It's not parallel. So, um, but yeah, I like what you were the piece about self-awareness, just being aware of that and what it's going to take to keep that momentum going. A few episodes back, we talked about, some of the different challenges we've had. And to me, I liken momentum to, when I was a kid going down that hill with a skateboard and sometimes having too much momentum and then hitting that little
Absolutely.
pebble,
Yep.
and just go, I'm still going forward. The skateboard's
Right.
about 50 feet behind me, and I'm just like diving, except it's not into water, it's onto asphalt.
Right.
So,
Well,
yeah.
Dave, that's absolutely a good point, because that's really where I was. Because when I finished up my degree, and me and the wife, because again, this has been 9 years straight that I've
Mhm.
been going to school, and then my wife looked over at me, we're watching TV or something. She looked at me and said, "So what are you going to do now?" And I was dumbfounded. I was like, "You're right. I've been going to school for 9 years. So now what do I do to replace
Yeah.
that intentional um,
Yeah.
thing I was doing?" And she was
Mhm.
absolutely correct that something was missing now that I had
Yeah.
created that momentum. And so that's when I got into teaching, because I knew I had to do something with myself,
Yeah.
and with
Absolutely.
all of that energy that I had. And so she was right. I had to do something. So within a couple of months, I was already teaching,
Yeah.
and giving back, and helping others. But that's the downside, kind of like you said, with the skateboard. After you graduate, and
Yeah.
you don't have to pick up a book anymore. You don't have to read, or you have to turn any assignments. You don't have to do any of that. So it's like, okay, yeah, that was an abrupt
Yeah. Yeah.
stop. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's now you are flying through there
It, it,
flailing
it
like,
goes
what do I
from
do
it goes
now?
from
What?
momentum to kinetic energy.
Right. Yeah. So you're right. In that term, in that, kind of, if you look at it that way, that it
Yeah.
did affect me. And so then I had to figure out what I was going to do with all that energy, with all that momentum that I had
Mhm.
created for that nine
How do you keep it
years.
going, or how are you going to
Yeah.
use
What
that
am I going to
momentum, or
use?
redirect it?
Yep. And
So,
that's really what I had to do, redirect it. And part of it was I did teach. Then I
yeah.
wrote some books,
Yep.
just again keeping those juices flowing,
Yep.
keeping it fresh. And so I just then the business. So it
Mhm.
did help me after I kind of redirected and figured it out. But initially, that stop was a little challenging for
Yeah.
me. So
And I
that's
and
the
I
other
agree,
side
and
of it.
it's uncanny again how similar our stories are, because like you, after the doctoral program, what next? Teaching, writing a book,
Right.
business. It's like we kept that momentum going, and sometimes when we do have a pause, it feels like something's missing.
Right. Yep.
What I feel like I should be doing something,
Yep.
and it's not that you've stopped. It's more like you're just gliding. You've jumped off that cliff, and you've got that momentum going, and then you just open up that wingsuit. I've never done it. I think that sounds
Right.
cool,
Right.
but to me, it's like jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. I'm not sure I'd ever do it. But now you're just gliding, and you're utilizing that momentum to carry you further. It doesn't mean you have to stop at every tree or town or whatever. You're just going. You're in your, like you said, your groove.
Right.
And that just becomes a part of who you are. Is once you get that certain amount of momentum, you're used to flying at a certain speed. So anything less than that is almost undesirable unless there's
Right.
something critical that comes
Yep.
up. So, and whatever speed that is for you, we're not saying you have to go as fast as us, or we're going as faster than anyone else. What's fast for us might be slow for someone else.
Right.
So
Yep.
it's just, it's all about perspective. And when we talk about momentum and speed and agility, it's really, what are you doing with that momentum? Once you find that groove, once you get that traction, what are you doing with it, and what are you doing to keep it going? And yes, you do have to take a break sometimes, whether it's for
Right.
30 days or
Yep.
4 years. You have to pace yourself and just enjoy the glide, if you will, for a while, and appreciate what you've done, so you can keep that momentum going, because you do have to recharge your batteries. But momentum is a huge, huge and important part of any project or any company. It gets back to, are we having meetings to have meetings to have meetings, or are we having a meeting to solve or to keep pressing forward? And that's where momentum comes in, because if you're having meetings to have a meeting to have a meeting to have a meeting to discuss another meeting, then you've lost your momentum. You're not even gliding. You've kind of like you're like trying to get your legs back when you're landing, and you keep getting air and you're popping up and down. So you're not
Right.
really accomplishing anything. So, having that direction and knowing what to do with it during those pauses is important, and knowing when to take a pause, because if you don't, you're going to fumble. And again, that momentum is there for a reason. It's to keep carrying you forward, whether it's active or whether it's passive momentum, and understanding the difference between active and passive momentum. Are you gliding, or are you making deliberate steps forward to keep things going forward?
No, no, that's a very good point, Dave, because that's where I got caught up to, again, going 9 years straight. And so I didn't take the proper breaks and the time to reflect and celebrate. And I know we talked about this in previous episodes, but that's also important,
Mhm.
that recharging, that rejuvenating, your energy. And I failed to do that. Even with my bachelor's degree, I didn't, celebrate that, didn't walk across the stage.
Mhm.
My master's degree, didn't celebrate, didn't take the time to pause and really appreciate it. And so when I got to my doctorate, I had to walk across the stage
Yeah.
because, again, I missed a couple opportunities to really embrace that and celebrate the accomplishment, because that's also important. Because if I wouldn't have finished my doctorate degree, and not been able to walk across the stage, then the two accomplishments I wouldn't have been able to celebrate.
Yeah.
And
It would have been
so
it would have been tough to go back in
ab-
time.
Absolutely. So it just so that's one thing. If we're talking now, if anyone ever asks, celebrate those
Mhm.
successes, and we've said this before, even if it's small, celebrate it, because
Yeah.
you're not guaranteed tomorrow, and
Yeah.
so you don't, like you say, you can't go back and say, okay, let's go celebrate it now, because you've missed that moment. So again,
And
it's
celebrating those pieces is part of that momentum. And,
absolutely, yeah,
and it's, you've earned it. So
right,
yeah, you go into a gliding or coasting mode because you've been working so hard and you've established that momentum. Again, another flying analogy, you're running down the hill and you finally get that lift with your hang glider or whatever. That work running down the hill is finally paid off. So now you get to enjoy the
right,
ride for a little bit,
yeah,
and just keep riding the waves, and the currents, if you will, until you find that next spot that you want to land, and then
right,
keep that momentum going again. So momentum is a very powerful tool. There is a downside to it, and that's
yeah,
burnout, and that's
yeah.
when you don't take those breaks, when you don't glide for a while and appreciate what's going on around you, and take the pictures and just absorb it all in and enjoy the moment or moments, or the days, weeks, or months or years for the time that you have it, because that's what happens. We turn a short-term strategy into a long-term solution, and a lot of times that doesn't work. You you can't sprint a marathon. Well, it's technically, I guess you could, theoretically, you could sprint a marathon. There's someone out there that's going to do it, but in most cases, that's not how a marathon is run. You have to pace yourself. You have to
Right.
celebrate each
Yeah.
mile. You have to celebrate that bottle of water when you get it, and replenish yourself along the way. You need to relax when you get the chance to, when you go on that straightaway, and then take advantage of that momentum to push up that hill, So you have to really understand the environment around you that you've created or that you're embedded in, to understand what is it going to take to keep that momentum going. Is it communication? Is it progress in a project? What are the milestones of that project or process? Is it just getting by because of, maybe it's an economic thing, or maybe it's a personal
Right.
thing? Again, we've said so many times before, sometimes just getting up in the morning and putting that first foot on the floor is a challenge for some folks,
Right.
but
Yeah.
that can create the momentum you need to take that second step and third step and start getting through the day. So
Right.
whatever momentum is to you, and then momentum is a very personal thing, you need to understand how it's affecting you and your environment, because what might be momentum today might not be momentum tomorrow, So you really have to think about what is really driving you. We've talked about this before, what's driving you, what's keeping you going. That's your momentum, that's your motivation, that's your inspiration. So many things that we've discussed in other episodes.
Well, Dave, you touched on it at the very beginning, with the critical self-reflection. I think, you mentioned that as I was speaking or right after I was speaking, but to get me down that path of momentum, it really did start with that critical self-reflection. It did
Mhm.
because I had to figure out, okay, this is not what I want. So I did a lot of defining what success looked like for me and
Right.
what I want for my future. So it did take that critical self reflection. And as I did that, then that led to, again, me understanding that if I stop today, I may not go back tomorrow. But that was all kind of in that, like you were just saying, defining what all that looks like, understanding the environment, understanding kind of your goal, where you're trying to
Yeah, I was just
go.
gonna say setting
Um,
goals and milestones
Absolutely.
because that's it to me. I liken that to the moving sidewalks in an airport. You're walking, then you get that momentum going, and then you get on that walkway that's moving like an escalator, right?
Right.
And do you take advantage of it and just keep pressing forward and get there quicker, or do you just pause and just catch your
Yep,
breath
just
because you've got the
glide through it.
momentum?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so that's all part of it. Understanding, where you're trying to go, where you are today, all those things again, and that's that critical self-reflection. But like you said, it's the goal setting, it's the defining of what success is. All those things, milestones, all those things are huge considerations for momentum and maintaining that momentum. Again,
Mhm.
also knowing when to pause, when to take a break, but being able to pick it back up. So
Yeah.
understanding yourself is a huge part of that. That self awareness, that critical self reflection. And again, you can define it from there. What that looks like, whether you take predetermined breaks or pauses,
Mhm.
or whether you just let it flow and then naturally, like you say, like with the walking escalators in the airport, do you come upon a time when things slow down for you, or you can glide, you take advantage of that, and then as soon as you get to the end of that ramp, you get pick
Yeah.
it back up. So
Yeah.
just understanding those things will definitely help you, and not just personal, but again in projects and
Mhm.
things like that at work, defining what all those things look like, and where you got some natural breaks, where you need to push forward, maybe
Mhm.
push a little bit harder. All those things
Yeah.
will help you, achieve your goals,
And
make
it's
it
easy to
through.
keep the momentum going when things are going good, but you
Great.
also have to
Yeah,
understand
exactly.
when challenges arise, maybe it's time off, maybe it's something personal, maybe, there's a change in direction. How do you keep the
Yep.
momentum going then? If they say you're going to terminal B and you're 50 feet away from it and they go, oh, no, now you're back all the way over there. What do
Right.
you do to keep that momentum going? And a lot of what we're talking about is momentum and maintaining that momentum, especially when things come up. There's a miscommunication, a deadline isn't met, what we thought we were doing, we have to make some changes. So how do we keep that momentum going so we don't lose it and we get sidetracked or completely derailed? And that and one of the books I wrote, that's we got derailed. We lost some of that leadership capacity, and a couple of us had to step up and kind of figure out, well, how do we cover that gap? And
Right.
so
Right.
there was a discussion, and it took a little bit of time to get that momentum going back because there's so many moving parts, and it's just something that you have to figure out.
Right.
And it's not the same for every situation.
Well, and I was gonna kind of compare it to the analogy we always make with a road trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're making great time. You're gonna make it to your destination, and a lot ahead of schedule. Then all of a sudden, you run into, especially like now in the wintertime, you run into a snowstorm.
Yeah.
Now you have to stay the night at a hotel because the roads are too bad. So you've lost a lot of that momentum. But does that, you know, stop the process? No, it doesn't.
Mhm.
You just have to, like you said, figure out best approach to get there at a reasonable time, even though you've missed that particular deadline. So it just, yeah, it's just really being open to, there may be some detours, some roadblocks that get in your
Mhm.
way, and just figuring that into, or not necessarily saying, okay, I anticipate a roadblock coming here, all right, but to be open to knowing that there may be a chance that things may not uh, meet the deadline, or you
Yeah.
may have to alter or change. And that's again another piece of that where you're really considering, how do I get there? That you have to factor that in. We would like to say, hey, I can go from A to B, no problem. But as we, we know, both of us, most of us know that the journey doesn't pan out a lot of times where
Mhm.
we have, in our mind, or the blueprint we have in front of us. There typically going to be some type of variations
Mhm.
to that journey. And that's, again, what this is all about, the
Yeah.
journeys of not
And
so ordinary people.
I like
Um,
how you said those roadblocks that come up sometimes either expectedly or unexpectedly.
right,
It can derail your momentum, but you can also use those to springboard your momentum as well to get you really,
right,
here's a challenge, and then you overcome it. That can bring that momentum back for the team to really
absolutely.
punch it up to the next level when you thought things were just about, you thought you're about sapped of your energy, and it's like all of a sudden, here's a break, here's a detour. Well, you got a night's rest, you had a decent bed to
Right,
sleep in, now you're ready to go again. And sometimes it's like, like you and I say, and like a lot of people say, oh, I found the solution at 2 o'clock in the morning when I was in the middle of the night. It's like
right.
sometimes that happens. And that's all you need is that break,
Yep,
that put it in neutral for a few minutes or a few hours and just coast for a little bit and recharge those batteries. Because momentum is a very interesting animal. What can be causing momentum one day can actually, sap your energy the next. So it's
right,
really understanding what momentum is and what it looks like in that environment, what it looks like to you, what it looks like to the other people on your team, because you might be going 110 miles an hour and there might be someone that's doing 10, and you're either dragging them along or maybe they're holding you back. So you have to understand, how do you bring that team together, because team momentum is definitely different than individual momentum. And
right.
then you talk about, all these layers and complexities. Now you've got 4, 5, 10, 20 people that you've just compounded that complexity to understand what motivation looks like on that team. And sometimes on a team, synergy happens and the momentum just explodes into something beautiful and glorious, and you're moving faster than you ever thought you imagined, and you're creating something even better than you'd ever anticipated, which is a really cool thing too.
Well, you often see that. I'll use football as an example because typically, going into
That's the one
halftime,
with the little white ball that you shoot in the basket, right?
we're gonna have to work on your sports offline. Uh, but yeah, you got your football team that's down a score or two, and then right before the halftime, they score a touchdown. They play tremendous defense, and then in the second half they get the ball back, and so that momentum, even though there was a gap because of halftime, but they started that momentum before halftime, and then they pick it right back up, and they like you say, it turns into something beautiful because now they turn. Actually, I was just watching the game last night where the team in the first half, they weren't doing too well. Then third quarter, they maxed. They made the same gains that they did in the entire first half, and then they
Mm,
continued that momentum, and they ended up doing really well.
yeah,
But even with that planned gap, that planned halftime, they were able to still maximize that momentum they had going into the
right.
halftime, and then they picked it back up, and like they never missed a beat. So,
Yeah,
like you say, sometimes those planned um, breaks are good, and so, or it could attain change the momentum, because actually it did change the other team's momentum. So they
yeah,
were doing well in the first half, the other team caught fire, and then everything flipped.
yeah,
So it just depends what side of the of that locker room
right,
you're in,
right.
whether you start to gain or whether you start to lose.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a pretty good
And
example.
I think that's a good example of a team working together
Right, right,
and synergizing momentum, because it shows that momentum is not just one-sided, one person. It's the amalgamation of the whole effort. And even
right.
if it's a small piece, that small piece is critical. Or if it's a big piece, maybe that big piece isn't as critical as you thought it was, but it's that collective momentum that
Yep.
just pushes things through unimaginable barriers and obstacles. And then the celebration comes. Then that's when you
Right.
use that, you take advantage of all that momentum to celebrate and drive you forward in the next game or the next project or the next stage or the next
Right.
phase.
No, and that's what I failed to mention. It was the team aspect of that. Like you say, they caught fire
Mhm.
as a team, which again helped them propel forward. But so that yeah, I should have highlighted that. But so thanks for for bringing
So
that back
you
in.
said it was some sort of sport, so I figured it was a team when you said it wasn't that white ball one.
Right. Um,
So,
yeah, but
uh, yeah, go.
I was just gonna say, with momentum, we've touched on the fact that it's a great thing, but also at the same time, it really can also tax
Yeah.
tax you in your efforts and energy, especially if you really haven't. So I just want to go back to the fact that defining what it looks like.
Mhm.
I think that's very helpful because again, you could go 100 miles an hour just full time, but if you don't have a destination, if you haven't kind of mapped out, okay, where I'm trying to go, then it can all be for naught because you can
Yeah.
just, you said it earlier too, it could turn into
Yeah.
burnout. I'm
You have
just
to be able
running
to
100
have
miles.
some control of that momentum so
Right.
you don't lose control of the vehicle, which happens sometimes.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about going too fast in other episodes. It's like momentum is great, and it's not necessarily speed, it's just the ability to keep progressing forward at a
Right.
consistent or just keep going forward in a positive direction. So, it's not about how fast you go, it's about the
Right.
consistency, which you and I talk about a lot. It's that consistency that keeps you moving forward in a positive direction. And sometimes maybe you do stop and go sideways or back because you hit a spot, but it's how do
Right.
you rekindle, how do you get that momentum back, how do you start that car back up when you stall it out?
Right.
That's a manual transmission reference for those of you who only know how to drive automatics. So, but yeah, it's, what do you do? How do you, when you get a flat tire, what do you do to get that momentum going so you can continue your journey? And
Right.
it's cool because sometimes momentum changes. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's
Absolutely.
slower, sometimes it looks like food, and sometimes it looks like sleep, if that makes sense. Sometimes it just takes on a different form. And sometimes you have to take a different vehicle to get to your destination. Like so many places, you could take an airplane to get to one spot, then you take a train, then a bus, then a car. Next thing you know, you're hiking up a giant mountain for 3 days. I've never done
Right.
that, but that's what I've heard. So there's different forms of momentum.
But and we touched on this, earlier about the whole redirecting our
Mhm.
momentum because again, you reach your milestone or you achieve your goal. So again, if you're on a team project at work, you accomplish the goal that you set or the project is complete. Now, what do you do with all that momentum that you had? I mean, now
Yeah.
you refocus your efforts into something
What's
else.
the
So
next thing? Are you focusing
absolutely,
on
I
family? Are you focusing on the next
absolutely
project? Are you focusing on a project that you've always wanted to do or whatever? I mean, yeah, what do you do with all that extra energy or the lack thereof?
right,
Taking
right,
that break and just really catching your breath again over something huge that you've accomplished.
right.
So, um, so we're getting close to time. Any final thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share?
Well, again, just I know we covered a lot of things.
Mhm.
So the making that critical self reflection, all that at the very beginning, the
Mhm.
identifying where you're trying to go, identifying your goals, what success looks like, the milestones that you want to achieve. It really, if you're gonna go down this path of really capitalizing on your momentum, is really defining what some of that looks like. So very similar to again. A road trip that we always refer to. If I know my destination, um, and I actually factor in breaks, all those types of things, and again, maybe factor in some time for the unknown that might occur. So I think the more you kind of outline what that looks like when you're going down this path, I think the better you will be at being able to manage it and
Yeah,
maintain it. I think we touched on that. So
yeah.
that's the biggest part of momentum is you want to be able to capitalize on again, not just running 100 miles an hour or driving 100 miles an hour, but being deliberate about it and how to maximize that
Mhm.
momentum while you have it. So
Yeah. I think that's a great way to capture and summarize everything. So I'm not gonna distort it with any of my my dry humor. So, well, maybe I just did. I don't know. So with that, we'd like to thank all of our viewers and listeners for joining us for another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. We really enjoy the feedback and suggestions that you've been providing. If there's anything that you'd like us to touch on or touch on again, or new topic, that's great. We're here, we're open. And so if you like what you heard, give us a like, give us a share. If someone can benefit from this, that's what it's all about for us. So until next time, we want you to keep on being your not so ordinary you.